He had spent 12 years hiding from the world, climbing no road but the one leading back to his lonely mountain cabin, until the morning he heard metal slamming like gunfire on the side of Highway 47. That sound stopped Ethan Miller cold. Inside a shaking animal control truck, a German shepherd was throwing himself against the steel crate with the same desperate terror Ethan had seen once before. Seconds before, a blast in Afghanistan took away the only partner he ever trusted. The shelter would call the dog violent. The deputy who'd been bitten wanted him put down. But Ethan recognized something no one else could see. This dog wasn't trying to attack. He was trying to survive a war only he could still hear. And when the storm rolled over the valley that night, and the terrified shepherd tore his way into the darkness, Ethan realized the truth. This wasn't just a dog that needed saving. This was a soul calling out to the only man who understood his language. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Or leave an amen for everyone fighting their own silent battles. The road that wound down from the northern ridge of the Colorado Rockies was a thin gray ribbon slicing through miles of pines, aspens, and rock ledges. The morning sun had just begun warming the frost on the windshield of Ethan Miller's old, dusty silver pickup, an aging Ford from the late 90s that still smelled faintly of gun oil and cedar even after all these years. Ethan, 50 years old but carved by time into something older, drove with the same steady stillness he carried in every part of his life. His face was lean, sharply angled, the kind of face that had once been youthful but was now marked by dry mountain wind and years of isolation. A thick, rough beard grew along his jawline, peppered with gray that spread like winter frost. His dark hair, once kept military short, now brushed the collar of his flannel shirt. His eyes, cold blue, watchful, rarely lifted from the road. He had lived alone in a cabin above Ridge Valley for more than 12 years, deeper in the mountains than most residents dared to drive after dark. The reason, though whispered about by townsfolk, remained known only to him. The battlefield memory of a K-9 partner dying in a flash of dust and fire. That memory had cleaved his life in half. The man he was before Afghanistan had been buried in the desert sand, and the man who walked out had never been able to come home again. Not truly. Trips into town were rare. Once every few months at most. Today's trip was one of them. Flour, canned food, propane, and a box of nails for the cabin roof he kept telling himself he'd fix. Ethan never stopped on these drives. Not for wildlife, not for people, not for anything. But today, something forced him to ease his foot off the gas. At first, it was only a strange metallic crash, sharp, repeated, unnatural for the quiet morning. Then came the unmistakable sound of frantic barking. Not the bored barking of a shelter dog. This was deeper, heavier, carrying the raw edge of panic. Ethan's gaze slid toward the roadside turnout 50 yards ahead. A county animal control truck was parked crookedly on the gravel, the rear transport crate shaking violently as if struck from the inside. A man stood beside it, gripping his forearm, blood streaking down the sleeve of his uniform. Ethan's jaw tightened. He recognized the uniform before he recognized the man. Tan cargo pants, dark green county windbreaker, the embroidered words, Ridge Valley Animal Services. The man wearing it, Rick Dalton, was average height, mid-40s, with a wiry frame and short, sandy blonde hair that stuck to his forehead with sweat. His face was sharp, with a narrow nose and thin lips that twisted with frustration. Rick usually had a calm, sarcastic ease to him, a man who'd seen every sort of domestic animal disaster and learned to laugh through most of it. But today, his expression was pale and shaken. and the transport crate. It was shaking like something inside was trying to tear its way through the metal door. Ethan slowed but forced himself not to stop. Not again. He didn't get involved anymore. He didn't want to see anything that resembled. But then he saw the dog. Through the small rectangular grate, a flash of gray and black fur slammed against the metal. A heavy-bodied German shepherd, muscular shoulders, broad chest, thick neck, was hurling himself against the door with such force the hinges rattled. Around 4 years old, maybe 5, but he moved with the explosive desperation of something far younger. His coat was a stormy mix of charcoal and slate, with streaks of pale silver down his legs and a dark saddle marking along his spine. His ears were pinned flat, completely flattened, a sign not of attack, but terror. His pupils were blown wide, showing rings of white. Saliva foamed at the edges of his muzzle. "Damn it, stay back!" Rick snarled, pressing a rag to his bleeding arm. "This dog's out of his mind. I'm calling it. He's getting put down today." Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. A normal person watching that dog would see aggression, rage, danger. Ethan saw something else entirely. The shepherd wasn't fighting the crate. He wasn't trying to bite anything that moved. His body posture, the angle of his neck, the frantic tremor running through his muscles. It wasn't the stance of a dog attacking outward. It was the stance of a dog expecting something to attack from above. A canine battlefield alert stance, something Ethan had seen once before. The last moment before a mortar dropped. The last moment before a friend never stood up again. His heartbeat thudded once, hard. He should have driven on. He had spent more than a decade building his world around the rule of not stopping, not looking back, not letting anything drag him into the place he had barely crawled out of. But his truck was slowing, then stopping. Then he was in park. His hands were trembling, and Ethan Miller hadn't trembled in a long, long time. He cut the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab made his ears ring. He sat there for a moment, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. Then he pushed the door open, climbed out, and shut it behind him with a soft thump. Rick turned at the sound. "What the... Ethan?" he blurted. "You never stop for anybody. What the hell are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the shepherd. The dog had stopped slamming the door the moment Ethan stepped closer, as if sensing a shift in the air. But the trembling didn't stop. His chest heaved. His hind legs scraped against the crate floor as he tried to push himself away from something only he could see. Rick wiped sweat from his brow with the uninjured hand. "This dog's bad news. Picked him up near the canyon. Bit right through a damn Kevlar glove. He's too far gone." Ethan stepped closer, slow, deliberate. The dog's gaze snapped to him, wild, terrified, pleading. And in that instant, Ethan saw not this dog, but another. A canine charging forward through a cloud of dust. A flash of tan fur. A choke chain glinting in the sun. A warning bark. A blast. Ethan swallowed. "He's not vicious," Ethan said quietly, surprising even himself with the sound of his own voice. "He's scared." Rick scoffed. Same difference. But Ethan didn't hear him. He took another step. The dog's trembling worsened, but he didn't lunge. Not at Ethan. His eyes stayed locked on him, wide, desperate, searching for something familiar. For the first time in 12 years, Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. A tiny crack in the wall he had built. He crouched slightly, keeping distance but lowering his profile. His voice was low, quiet, a frequency meant not for people, but for dogs. "Easy," he murmured. "Easy, boy." The shepherd's breathing hitched. The fear in his eyes sharpened into focus. Recognition. Not of Ethan himself, but of the calm, the tone, the body language of someone who knew exactly what kind of terror lived behind that ribcage. Rick stared. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't fully know. All he knew was that this was the first time in 12 years he had stepped towards something instead of walking away. And something inside that crate, broken, terrified, and fighting ghosts, was stepping toward him too. The story began in that silence, on a cold Colorado roadside, with a man who never stopped, finally stopping. And a German shepherd named Ranger, trembling but watching him through the shadows. The Ridge Valley Animal Shelter sat on the far edge of town, just beyond the old lumber yard and the train tracks that rarely carried anything but empty freight cars these days. It was a simple one-story building, beige walls, a tin roof, and a sign that had been repainted so many times the wood grain was permanently darkened. The parking lot was gravel, the kind that crunched loudly under boots, loud enough to spook most dogs inside the kennels. Ethan Miller stepped out of his truck that afternoon, his shoulders hunched against the late autumn wind sweeping down from the mountains. He still smelled faintly of pine smoke from his cabin stove. His boots were worn, his leather jacket cracked at the elbows, and the expression on his face was the same guarded stillness he had carried since the war. Inside, the shelter smelled of bleach, wet fur, and old newspapers. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the hallway in a cold, white glare. Behind each chain-link kennel door, dogs barked, whined, or paced restlessly, except for one, the gray and black German shepherd from the roadside, Ranger. He was silent now, but not calm. He stood rigid at the back of his kennel, body trembling, ears flattened so hard they nearly disappeared into his fur. His chest rose and fell too fast. Every few seconds he shifted his stance as if preparing to bolt, but having nowhere to go. Laura Hayes, the shelter director, walked beside Ethan. She was in her mid-40s, a tall woman with broad shoulders and a decisive gait. Her brown hair was streaked with an early silver that she wore proudly, pulled into a loose ponytail. Years of managing intake emergencies had sharpened her features, high cheekbones, focused eyes, a firmness in her jaw. But there was warmth buried beneath the exhaustion. She wasn't the type to show fear easily. She folded her arms, watching Ranger. "Ethan, I'm still not sure why you asked to come here. Rick said you got closer to that dog than anyone else ever tried." Ethan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Ranger, reading every twitch, every muscle tightening. "I want to try something," he murmured. Laura raised an eyebrow. "Something like what?" "You're not going inside that kennel. I can't authorize that." "I don't need to," Ethan said. He took a slow step back, then another, creating a wide circle of distance. 10 feet. Not any closer. He pulled a worn paperback from the inside pocket of his jacket. The cover was so faded the title was almost unreadable. The Old Man and the Sea. He thumbed open a page about halfway through. Then he sat. On the concrete floor, cross-legged, spine straight. Laura blinked. You're just going to sit there?" Ethan nodded. "And read." It made no sense to her. She opened her mouth to ask another question, but something about Ethan's posture, the quiet discipline of it, reminded her of the men she used to treat when she volunteered at the VA hospital years ago. Men who never explained themselves until the results spoke for them. So she stepped back and watched. At first, Ranger didn't know what to do with this silent intruder. The dog barked once, a sharp, defensive burst. Then twice. Then he lunged forward and hit the chain link with his chest, the metal rattling. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't lift his head. He simply turned the page. The shepherd paced, panting, confused. This human wasn't yelling, wasn't approaching, wasn't challenging. He wasn't giving any of the signals Ranger had learned to expect from men. So the dog retreated into the back corner again, watching. Ethan waited. Minutes passed. Then a half hour. Then nearly an hour. Ranger's breathing began to slow. His muscles loosened just enough to steady his trembling. His tail still tucked low, but the whites of his eyes were no longer fully exposed. Laura found herself whispering as if afraid sound might undo the fragile progress. "I don't understand. How is he calming down?" Ethan closed the book but didn't get up. "He's not calming. He's recalibrating." Laura frowned. "Meaning?" "He's deciding whether I'm a threat," Ethan said. "Dogs like him, they don't react to what you do. They react to what you are." "And what are you?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Someone who's been afraid the same way he is." Laura didn't know what to say to that. Just then, soft footsteps echoed down the hall. A young woman rounded the corner, carrying a stack of files clutched tightly to her chest. Megan Brooks. She was 26, petite, with gentle features and a softness that didn't quite match the harsh fluorescent lighting of the shelter. Her hair was a warm honey blonde, tied messily at the back of her head, with a scrunchie that looked seconds from falling out. Freckles dotted her fair cheeks, and her green eyes were alert, empathetic. The eyes of someone who felt deeply for every animal that passed through those kennels. She wore navy blue scrubs, slightly oversized, and a badge that said veterinary technician. She was new to Colorado, having moved from Kansas after finishing a shelter medicine internship. Although kind and patient, she carried a quiet determination, born from losing a childhood dog to an abusive neighbor. That loss had shaped her entire career path. Megan stopped short when she saw Ethan sitting on the floor. "Oh," she whispered. "So it is true. You really came." Ethan looked up briefly. "Didn't know it was something to talk about." Megan shrugged, cheeks blushing. "Well, you're kind of a legend around town. The man who lives in the mountains and doesn't speak to anyone unless he absolutely has to." Laura grinned. "See? Told you." Ethan shook his head but didn't argue. Megan hesitated, glancing toward Ranger. "Is he doing okay?" "Better than before," Ethan said. "Not good. Just better." Megan shifted her weight anxiously. Then, biting her lip, she reached into the stack of files she'd been holding. I wasn't supposed to keep these. They belonged to Ranger's previous owner. He dumped them during intake and said they were trash. But I scanned through and found something important." She stepped forward cautiously, extending the file to Ethan. He didn't take it at first. "What is it?" "His service records," Megan whispered. "From a private K-9 unit. Looks like Ranger served overseas. Afghanistan, Iraq, a few undisclosed sites. He was discharged 2 years ago due to behavioral deterioration after combat exposure." Ethan finally took the file, his fingers brushing the edge. Megan lowered her voice even more. "And there's more. The man who adopted him after discharge? He has 3 complaints on record for animal mistreatment. Nothing that stuck legally, but still. Something sharp flickered in Ethan's eyes. He opened the file. Inside were medical sheets, combat deployment summaries, a bonded pair notation, and a completed discharge certificate. Ranger's name was stamped across the top in bold black ink. Ranger, age 4, multi-purpose K9, retired. Ethan's hand shook. Laura saw it. Megan saw it. Ranger, watching from his corner, seemed to feel it. Because in that exact moment, the shepherd's ears lifted, just slightly, and his trembling slowed. Ethan stared at the papers, images of sandstorms and sirens bleeding into his vision. He swallowed hard. "He wasn't broken," he whispered. "He was abandoned." Megan nodded gently. "Like a lot of good dogs after combat." Ethan lifted his gaze to Ranger. The shepherd's golden eyes met his, no longer wild, just lost. And Ethan felt something inside him recoil in painful recognition. Because that look, haunted, searching, betrayed, was a look Ethan had carried in his own eyes for years. A look he had buried in silence on a cold mountain. He closed the file slowly, his palm pressed against the cover as though steadying it, or steadying himself. Ranger lowered his head but didn't look away. 2 soldiers, wounded in different wars, recognizing the same language. And for the first time, Ethan whispered the name, quiet, steady, accepting it fully. Ranger. The dog's ears twitched. A connection forged in silence held between them. The chapter closed with Ethan still sitting on the cold concrete, Ranger still trembling but watching him, and the thin, fragile thread between them tightening just enough to matter. The next morning at Ridge Valley Animal Shelter began with a kind of tension that even the barking dogs seemed to recognize. The air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were waiting for something unpleasant to arrive. It arrived at 8:12 a.m. The front door slammed open so hard it struck the stopper with a crack. Laura Hayes looked up from her office window and swore under her breath. Ethan, seated on his usual spot across from Ranger's kennel, didn't move. He didn't need to. The shift in the entire building told him someone angry had just walked in. That someone was Deputy Sam Turner. He filled the doorway like a storm cloud, mid-40s, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the charcoal gray sheriff's department uniform. His sandy brown hair was cut short in a regulation crop, but the stress of years had left streaks of dull gray along the sides. His jaw was square, but tight, almost locked from the strain of grinding his teeth. His face bore a rugged, weathered look, with faint scars near his temple, old ones, from something he never talked about. More striking than anything else was his right hand. It was wrapped in a thick white bandage, stretching from knuckles to mid-forearm. Sam Turner was a man shaped by one event. 5 years earlier, he had been brutally mauled by a rescued pit mix during what should have been a routine welfare check. The attack nearly cost him his arm. Nerve damage, surgery, months of rehab. He had clawed his way back to active duty, but the trauma stayed. It lived behind his stern look and flared whenever a dog lunged, barked, or even stared too long. Today, that trauma was alive in his eyes. "Where is he?" Sam demanded, his voice sharp enough to slice through steel. Laura stepped out of her office, folding her arms. "Sam, calm down." "Do not tell me to calm down," Sam snapped. His gaze swept across the hallway, landing on the door to the quarantine wing. "That animal's still alive? After what he did to me?" Laura's tone remained firm. He reacted out of fear. And if you hadn't grabbed him so abruptly during intake, maybe— I followed procedure, Sam barked. And that thing still nearly tore my hand off. I'm not putting another officer at risk. I'm invoking the county's aggressive animal statute. Ethan finally stood. There was no hostility in him, just a quiet tension and a tired steadiness, like a man long used to facing trouble without ever raising his voice. Deputy, Ethan said softly. Sam spun toward him, narrowing his eyes. You, the mountain man who thinks he's a dog whisperer. Ethan didn't react. Ranger didn't attack you, Ethan said. He panicked. Same damn thing, Sam said. No, Ethan replied. It isn't. Laura moved between them. Sam, you know as well as I do the statute doesn't call for immediate euthanasia. But it does call for a mandatory evaluation, Sam shot back. And since my injury qualifies under the statute, I get a say. He pulled a folded document from his belt. The paper trembled slightly in his left hand, though he tried to hide it. He extended it toward Laura. I'm issuing a 7-day countdown, he said. If that dog doesn't demonstrate minimal controllability, muzzled walking, lead compliance, non-reactivity, he gets put down. No exceptions. Laura's face tightened. You can't. It's legal, Sam said. And it's happening. Ranger felt the tension long before he understood it. The shepherd pressed himself into the back corner of his kennel, eyes wide, body trembling. The scent of Sam's fear, sharp, electric, filled with adrenaline, was enough to unsettle him even through the bars. Ethan turned slightly toward the dog, softening his shoulders. It's okay, he murmured to Ranger. Easy. Sam scoffed. See? He reacts even to me walking in. He's a hazard. You're a trigger, Ethan corrected. Not a threat. Sam stepped forward, fury rising. What did you just— But Laura blocked him again. Deputy Turner, you've made your position clear. 7 days. But Ethan has the right to attempt training. Sam glared at both of them, then at Ranger, whose ears pinned flat again. Fine, Sam growled. But mark my words, Laura, that dog will never pass. He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving tension thick as dust behind him. The shelter hallway fell silent after he left. Megan Brooks appeared moments later, face pale, having overheard everything. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like a shield. 7 days, she whispered. That's not enough. Not for any dog. Not for one like him. Her voice wavered. She knew what PTSD looked like. Ranger didn't need dominance training. He needed trust. He needed safety. He needed someone who spoke his language. He needed Ethan. Ethan didn't speak immediately. He stared at Ranger, who stared back with the same haunted stillness. Finally, Megan said, Ethan, is this even possible? Ethan didn't look at her. It has to be. He lowered himself to the floor, back to his 10-foot mark. He exhaled slowly, letting his shoulders relax into neutrality. Ranger, he said softly, we're going to start. For the next hours, Ethan did not move except to turn a page of his paperback or adjust his breathing. Megan stayed nearby, observing with quiet amazement. Laura listened from her office door, occasionally glancing in, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. By midday, Ranger's body had loosened enough that he didn't flinch whenever Ethan inhaled deeply. His eyes followed Ethan, no longer boiling with panic, but flickering with confusion. Late in the afternoon, Ethan closed his book and spoke, Not to Ranger, but to Megan, though his gaze remained on the dog. "I had a K9 partner once," Ethan said, voice low. "Shadow." Megan stepped closer, sensing the tremor underneath Ethan's calm. "He died because of me," Ethan said. "I gave a bad command during a sweep, hesitated, thought he was reacting to heat or exhaustion." He swallowed. He wasn't. He'd sensed the IED first. Megan's breath caught. "Ethan." He shook his head lightly. "I've carried that for 12 years. Shadow trusted me, and I failed him." Ranger whined softly, picking up the shift in Ethan's tone. Ethan inhaled. "This dog, he reminds me of everything I ran from." Megan didn't speak. She understood that some wounds could only heal by being spoken aloud. Training began the next morning. No commands at first, just breathing, posture, and presence. Ethan sat. Ranger watched. Ethan turned his shoulders away. Ranger stepped an inch forward. Ethan extended an open hand toward the gate. Not touching, not forcing, just offering. Day 2. Ethan began using K9 German commands softly. Sitz, Platz, ruhig. Ranger didn't obey, but he reacted, ears lifting, muscles shifting with memory. Day 3, Ranger crept close enough to sniff through the bars. Day 4, he stayed near the gate instead of retreating. And on day 5, something broke open in the best way. Ranger approached the gate as Ethan rested his hand against it. The shepherd hesitated, trembling with the internal war between fear and instinct. Then, with the gentlest movement, he touched his nose to Ethan's hand. Megan gasped softly. Laura covered her mouth. Ethan didn't move. "Good," he whispered. "Good soldier." It was the first moment Ranger accepted Ethan as handler, the first moment Ranger chose him. But that night, the sky tore open. A thunderstorm rolled violently across Ridge Valley, the kind that shook windows and made even seasoned ranch dogs whine under porches. Lightning clawed across the sky, followed by blasts of thunder like artillery fire. In the dark quarantine wing, Ranger jolted awake. The sounds weren't of a storm. They were explosions, mortars, the desert. His PTSD ignited instantly. He rammed the kennel door once, twice, a third time. The latch, a temporary one Rick had reinforced only lightly, snapped, and Ranger, in blind terror, sprinted into the storm and vanished into the night. The storm had passed hours ago, leaving Ridge Valley washed in a cold, colorless dawn. Fog clung to the treetops like torn fabric. The roads were slick, and the wind still carried the metallic scent of lightning strikes. At 5:03 a.m., Ethan's phone rang. It almost never rang. Only 3 people had his number. When he saw Megan Brooks appear on the screen, her name glowing faintly in the dim cabin light, he answered immediately. Her voice came through broken, trembling. Ethan. He's gone. Ranger's gone. Sam knows. He's going to shoot him. I know he is." Her breath hitched, sharp and panicked. "I heard him talking on the radio. He's taking 2 deputies with him. Ethan, please, please go. He listens to you more than any of us." Ethan didn't waste a second. "I'm on my way." He grabbed his boots, his jacket, and the old leather belt that had seen deployments on 3 continents. He didn't bother locking the door behind him. By the time he reached the foot of Bear Ridge, the sun still hadn't broken the horizon. The ridge loomed high above the valley like a pale gray spine of jagged stone. On its northern face sat the old Bear Ridge Quarry, abandoned decades ago after flooding and a series of cave-ins. Locals said animals instinctively found their way there during storms. Deep stone absorbed sound. It was the closest thing to silence in the wild. Ethan knew Ranger would have run straight for it. And he was right. At the base of the trail leading toward the quarry, 3 figures stood, dark silhouettes against the shifting fog. Deputy Sam Turner was one of them, jaw clenched tight, his uniform soaked from hiking through wet brush. His bandaged right hand was tucked close to his chest. Slung over his left shoulder was a rifle, standard issue for wildlife emergencies. Beside him stood 2 younger deputies. The first, Deputy Kyle Ramirez, was in his mid-20s, lean with olive skin and neatly cropped black hair. He had the nervous energy of someone still proving himself. Kyle came from a family of ranchers and had joined law enforcement only a year earlier. Despite his youth, dark circles under his eyes hinted at long shifts and the pressure of being the department's newest recruit. The second, Deputy Mark Collins, was early 30s, tall and broad like a football linebacker. His sandy blonde beard was trimmed close, but his expression revealed uncertainty. Mark was gentle by nature, a man who volunteered at the local food pantry on weekends. But right now he held his rifle like it weighed more than he could morally carry. Between the 3 of them stood Laura Hayes, shelter director, arms wide, blocking the trail like a human barricade. She was wearing a heavy brown coat thrown hastily over her pajamas, her hair still damp from rushing out of her house. Her chest rose and fell with controlled anger. "You're not going up that trail," she said, voice low but firm. Sam's jaw twitched. "Move, Laura. That dog is dangerous and the storm has him half crazed." "He's scared," Laura shot back. "And if you go up there with guns, you'll make it worse." "It's already worse," Sam said. "Look at my hand." Laura didn't flinch. "That happened because you forced him. Don't force him again." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we don't have to." Sam cut him off sharply. "We follow protocol." Mark swallowed. "With respect, sir, the dog was doing better. The staff said so." Sam snapped. "He escaped. That's all that matters now." Ethan stepped into the clearing. The group turned. He didn't speak at first, just took in the scene, the rifles, the tension, Laura's shaking shoulders. Sam glared. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's voice was calm, low, steady. "You brought guns." "Because we're ending this today," Sam said. Ethan shook his head once. "Ranger isn't running," he said quietly. "He's calling for help." The words hung in the air, sinking into the space between them. Mark looked down at his boots. Kyle shifted his weight. Laura exhaled shakily. Sam opened his mouth to argue, but Ethan walked past him, up the trail, without another word. Sam didn't stop him. Some part of him, the part that remembered screaming under a dog's teeth 5 years ago, wanted to follow, to make sure the threat was handled. But another part, deeper and more human, couldn't bring himself to walk next to the man who clearly knew more about wounded dogs than he ever would. So Sam stood there, fists clenched, torn between duty and something else entirely. The trail up Bear Ridge was slick with mud and scattered with broken shale. Ethan moved steadily, eyes scanning the ground. The storm had turned the mountain into a raw wound. Branches snapped, stones displaced, paw prints smeared in wet dirt. Then he found them. Ranger's tracks, deep, frantic, veering toward the quarry. Ethan quickened his pace. He reached the quarry edge 20 minutes later. The old mining site was a wide bowl of jagged rock formations and collapsed tunnels. Pools of standing water reflected the washed-out sky. Rusted equipment lay half-buried under decades of debris. And somewhere in that maze of stone, Ranger was crying. Not loudly, not violently. A low, fractured whine drifted across the quarry floor, barely audible. Ethan followed it, down a sloped path, across broken beams, past a rusted mining cart overturned on its side. Then he found the crevice, a narrow vertical crack in the rock, just wide enough for a dog to slip through, but not to climb out. "Ranger," Ethan called softly. A faint whimper answered him. Ethan leaned over the edge. The shepherd lay about 8 feet down, wedged between jutting rocks. His right hind leg was twisted painfully, caught under a broken steel support bar. His fur was soaked from the storm, coated in mud, his body shaking uncontrollably. His eyes lifted when he saw Ethan. Wild fear, recognition, relief, all tangled together. "I've got you," Ethan whispered. He dropped to his knees, wedged his boots into secure footing, and began lowering himself into the crack. Halfway down, a sharp rock tore into his palm. Blood streaked across the stone, but he ignored it. When he reached Ranger, the dog's trembling intensified. PTSD turned every sound into a threat, every shadow a danger. Ethan placed one steady hand on Ranger's shoulder. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're not alone." He inspected the trapped leg. The steel bar was wedged deep but movable. Ethan took a breath, braced himself, and pushed. The bar shifted with a shriek of rust, and Ranger yelped sharply. "I know," Ethan whispered. "I know. I'm sorry." Finally, the leg came free. Ethan tore a strip from his own shirt sleeve, wrapping it around his bleeding hand. Then he pulled off his leather belt and fastened it around Ranger's chest like a harness. He pointed upward. "We climb out together, soldier." The climb was brutal. Ranger's injured leg made every movement agonizing. Twice Ethan slipped, sending pebbles cascading downward. Once Ranger lost his footing and howled, nearly dragging Ethan with him. But Ethan dug in. His boots scraped. His muscles burned. His breath tore in and out. 30 minutes passed, then 40. And finally, Ethan pulled Ranger onto the ledge. The dog collapsed against him, chest heaving, head sinking onto Ethan's lap. Ethan rested a hand on his neck, grounding him through the tremors. "You did good," he whispered. "Real good." Above them, the sun finally broke the horizon. The climb down Bear Ridge was slower than the climb up. Ethan moved step by steady step, his boots scraping the wet stone, one arm around Ranger's shoulders to keep the dog from collapsing under his injured leg. The shepherd leaned heavily against him, exhausted, trembling from cold and shock. But every few feet, he lifted his head as if checking to make sure Ethan was still there. Dawn had finally broken fully, turning the fog into a pale gold haze that clung to their silhouettes like a ghost following them down the trail. At the base of the ridge, the small group still waited. Laura with her coat wrapped tight around her, Deputy Mark Collins with his rifle lowered and his brow knit with worry, and young Deputy Kyle Ramirez shifting anxiously as he watched Ethan and the dog descend. Even Sam Turner stood motionless, his shoulders stiff, his jaw locked, but his rifle pointed downward now instead of ready. As Ethan emerged from the fog, guiding Ranger steadily down the last few yards, something in the clearing shifted. The anger, the tension, the fear that had hung in the air just hours earlier, all seemed to dissolve into a heavy, stunned silence. Ranger reached the bottom and pressed his head weakly against Ethan's hip. Mud streaked his fur, and his injured leg dragged slightly behind him. And yet, despite the exhaustion, he stayed glued to Ethan's side like a soldier following his commander through the final stretch of a long mission. Sam stared at the dog for a long time, something unreadable in his expression. Then he exhaled, slow, shaky, almost defeated, and lowered his rifle completely. "That dog," he murmured, his voice raw in a way none of them expected. "He's not what I thought." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest Sam Turner had come to one in a long time. Laura gave him a small nod, an acknowledgement that she understood how hard those words must have been for him. Ethan said nothing. Words didn't matter right now. Ranger needed help. Back at the Ridge Valley Animal Shelter, Megan was waiting on the porch before they even pulled in. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy braid, strands sticking to her cheeks from the cold air, her green eyes wide with fear and relief all at once. She rushed down as Kyle opened the back of the truck, Ethan lifting Ranger gently with both arms and carrying him inside. Megan moved quickly, guiding Ethan to the medical room, a small space with stainless steel counters, cabinets full of supplies, and an exam table warmed by a heat pad for animals recovering from hypothermia. The scent of antiseptic was strong, but Ranger leaned into the warmth gratefully as Ethan set him down. Megan checked the injured leg with careful hands. "It isn't broken," she whispered, relief melting her voice. "Just a deep strain and some tearing. He's lucky." She wrapped a soft brace around the leg and secured it with gentle pressure. "He'll walk again. Might limp a bit for a while, but he'll walk." Ethan exhaled, something releasing in his chest that he didn't even realize he'd been holding. Laura stepped inside the room then, her expression softer than usual. "Ethan," she said quietly, "we need to talk." He tensed instinctively, expecting bad news, but Laura simply gestured for him to follow her into the hallway. She leaned against the wall with her arms loosely crossed, less defensive, more reflective. "You saved him," she said. "I don't think anyone else could have, not even us." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't save him. He found me." Laura smiled faintly. "Maybe both things can be true." She hesitated, then added, "We have a cabin behind the shelter. Tiny place, barely enough for a bed and a stove. But it's empty. And we could use someone who understands dogs with trauma, someone who knows how to get through to them." Ethan blinked. "You want me to stay? Here?" "Yes," Laura said. "Ranger trusts you. And frankly, we need someone who can help the others. PTSD dogs, abandoned working dogs. They come through here more often than you'd think." Ethan looked down the hallway, toward the medical room where Ranger lay dozing under Megan's watchful eyes. 12 years alone in the mountains had calcified inside him. He didn't know what it meant to stay anywhere anymore. But he knew this much. He didn't want to walk away from Ranger. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Laura nodded once as if she'd been expecting that answer all along. That night, when the shelter had grown quiet and the last lights clicked off, Ethan sat in the small cabin behind the facility. It was rustic, pine walls, iron stove, a narrow bunk bed, but it felt strangely familiar, like the temporary housing he'd known during deployments. Ranger lay beside the bunk on a thin mattress Megan had placed there earlier. His breathing was heavy but peaceful. For the first time in a long time, Ethan reached for his phone. He scrolled through old contacts until he found a name he hadn't been able to look at for 12 years. James Porter. James had been on the same team in Afghanistan, an angular, sharp-featured man with deep-set brown eyes and a prominent scar on his left cheek from an explosion during a night raid. He had always been steady, always calm under fire, the kind of soldier who carried humor in the worst conditions. Ethan had avoided him since Shadow died, avoided everyone, but tonight he pressed call. James answered on the third ring. "Miller?" His voice cracked slightly. "Jesus, I thought you were dead." "No," Ethan said softly. "Just gone." There was a long pause. Then James asked, voice heavy with guilt, "Why did you disappear, man? Why'd you leave without talking to us?" Ethan closed his eyes. "Because I killed him. Shadow. I gave the wrong command." I hesitated. Silence. Then James exhaled, sharply, almost angrily. "Ethan, that's not what happened." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" James's voice lowered. "Shadow didn't die because of you. He broke rank. He pushed me aside. He smelled the pressure plate. I would have stepped on it." His voice shook. "Shadow saved my life. He didn't die from a mistake. He died doing his job." The room swayed. Ethan's breath shuddered. "I thought." "I know what you thought," James said. "But you've been punishing yourself for nothing. 12 years, Ethan. 12 years you spent alone for a lie your mind told you." Something hot stung Ethan's eyes. He bowed his head. James whispered, "Come home sometime. We still miss you." Ethan didn't promise, but he didn't hang up either. They talked for the first time in over a decade, words healing something that had never stopped bleeding. Winter arrived fully 2 weeks later. Snow drifted across the valley, muffling the world into a quiet, white hush. Ranger healed fast, still limping, still tender, but he stayed close to Ethan, following him from room to room like a shadow with heartbeat. One morning, a new intake arrived, a trembling hound with ribs showing, patches of fur missing, and eyes full of the same hollow fear Ranger once carried. The dog cowered in the corner of his kennel, unable to look anyone in the eye. Ethan watched him silently. Then he carried an old wooden chair to the front of the kennel, sat down, opened his worn paperback, the same ritual that had saved Ranger. Ranger curled up beside him on the floor, resting his head on Ethan's boot. Ethan whispered to the new dog, voice low and steady, "You're safe. Take your time." We both did. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in quiet. And in that quiet, something new began, something no one could yet name, something that felt like a beginning disguised as an ending, but whether it would stay that way, only time could tell.